My name is Kendra, and I am 34 years old. I am a specialist in corporate mergers and acquisitions, which means I destroy companies for a living, or I save them depending on who pays me more. For years, I treated my family like a charity case that I could never quite fix. But last Tuesday was the day I finally decided to liquidate the asset. Before I tell you how I turned my family into homeless people on paper in less than 24 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank account that suddenly decided to close for business. It started on a Tuesday afternoon inside the glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of the Sterling and Cooper building in downtown Chicago. The air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees, but the tension in the room made it feel like a sauna. I was sitting at the head of a mahogany table staring down three executives from a tech startup who were trying to bluff their way out of a hostile takeover. My phone was face down on the table next to my notepad. We were in the final minutes of negotiation. The silence was heavy. I was about to deliver the final terms that would strip these men of their majority shares when my phone vibrated against the wood. It was a long, aggressive vibration. Then another, and another. I frowned. My assistant David knew never to interrupt me during a closing unless the building was on fire. I glanced down at the screen. It was not David. The name flashing on the screen was Ebony, my younger sister. The notification preview showed an audio file attachment and a text message. "Guess who has a surprise for you? Happy Tuesday, big sis." I felt a flash of irritation. Ebony was 29 years old, but she acted like a teenager who had just discovered social media. She knew I was working. She knew I paid for her lifestyle specifically so she would not bother me while I was working. One of the executives cleared his throat and asked, "Miss Brooks, are we ready to sign, or do you need to consult your team?" I looked up at him. My face was a mask of perfect professional indifference. I picked up the phone. "I am sorry, gentlemen," I said smoothly, my voice steady. "I have a family emergency that requires my immediate attention. Give me 5 minutes." I did not wait for their permission. I stood up, smoothed down my $3,000 blazer, and walked out of the conference room. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of the hallway. I walked past the open office area where junior associates were typing furiously and ducked into a small private phone booth near the elevators. I sat down and put in my wireless earbuds. My heart was not racing. I was annoyed, not afraid. I assumed Ebony was sending me a recording of her singing or perhaps a voice note begging for another limit increase on the credit card I gave her. I opened the message thread. The file was 3 minutes long. I pressed play. The audio quality was clear. It sounded like it was recorded in a dining room. I heard the clinking of silverware on china. I recognized the ambient noise immediately. It was my parents' dining room in the colonial house I paid the mortgage on. I heard my father Harold's deep, booming laugh. Then I heard a voice that made my stomach turn. It was Preston, my sister's husband. The man who claimed to be a venture capitalist but had never actually ventured any capital that wasn't mine. Preston was speaking his mouth full of food. "You guys worry too much," he said. "Kendra is like a guard dog, an ugly, loyal guard dog. You throw her a bone of affection once a month, and she will bark at anyone who comes near your money. She craves approval. It is actually pathetic." I stared at the wall of the phone booth. My breath hitched. Then I heard my mother, Tina. Her voice was soft and sweet, the same voice she used when she asked me to pay for her vacations. "Oh, Preston, do not call her a dog. That is mean." I waited for her to defend me. I waited for my mother to say that I was her daughter, that I had worked hard to support them. Instead, my mother continued. "She is more like a mule, strong but not very bright emotionally. We just have to keep telling her how proud we are of her career. That is the key. As long as she thinks she is the successful one, she will keep writing checks to prove it." My father laughed again. "She really thinks we love her. What we love is the lifestyle she provides. Could you imagine actually having to listen to her talk about contract law for an hour without getting paid for it?" She is so dry. Ebony is the only one with any real personality in this family. Ebony's voice chirped in the recording. She was the one holding the phone, obviously. And that is why I am the favorite, right, Daddy? Of course, my father said. You are the joy. Kendra is the utility bill. We pay the bill so we can keep the lights on, but nobody loves the electric company. The recording ended with the sound of them clinking glasses. A toast. To the utility bill, Preston said, laughing. The silence in the phone booth was deafening. I took the earbuds out of my ears slowly. I looked at my reflection in the glass door. I expected to see a woman crying. I expected to see a daughter broken by the realization that her entire family saw her as nothing more than a financial resource. But I was not crying. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. Inside my chest something had snapped. It was not a break. It was a release. For 10 years I had been carrying the weight of their expectations, the guilt of being the one who made it out, the obligation to lift them up with me. I had tolerated Preston's arrogance. I had tolerated Ebony's selfishness. I had tolerated my parents' passive-aggressive comments about my lack of a husband because I thought that deep down we were a family. I was wrong. We were not a family. We were a business transaction, and this transaction was no longer profitable. I looked at the phone again. Ebony had sent a follow-up text. Just a joke, sis, do not get mad. Dad is a little drunk. Love you. She thought she was taunting me. She thought she could poke the bear and then hide behind the just a joke defense. She thought I was still the desperate little girl who would do anything for a smile from Daddy. She was wrong. I was not that girl anymore. I was a shark. And I smelled blood. I typed a reply. My fingers moved fast. I did not write a paragraph. I did not ask for an explanation. I wrote 3 words. So do I. I hit send. They loved my money. Well, so did I. And I was done sharing it. I exited the messaging app and opened my contacts. I scrolled down to David, my executive assistant. I did not text him. I called him. He picked up on the first ring. Yes, Ms. Brooks. Is the deal closed? Not yet, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was colder, sharper. It sounded like the voice I used when I was about to destroy a hostile witness in a deposition. David, I need you to execute a protocol immediately. There was a pause. Which protocol, ma'am? The Scorched Earth Protocol, I said. Access the family trust. Access the supplementary credit accounts for Harold, Tina, Ebony, and Preston. Access the lease agreements for the vehicles. David hesitated. Ms. Brooks, are you sure? That will freeze everything. They will be stranded. I looked at my reflection again. I adjusted my blazer. I fixed a stray hair. I said, do it, David. Cancel the cards. Report them as compromised. Contact the leasing agency and initiate immediate repossession of the Mercedes and the Range Rover. Call the utility companies for the estate and schedule a disconnect for non-payment. Use the power of attorney they signed 3 years ago. But ma'am, David stammered. It is 4 o'clock. The banks will close soon. That is the point, I said. I want them to decline. I want them to stand at the register and feel the humiliation of a declined card. I want them to drive home and find the lights off. I want them to realize that the utility bill has decided to stop providing service. I hung up the phone before he could argue. I stood up. I took a deep breath. I felt lighter than I had felt in years. I walked back out of the phone booth and down the hallway. I walked back into the conference room. The 3 executives looked up nervously. Is everything all right, Ms. Brooks? I smiled. It was a genuine smile. A terrifying smile. Everything is perfect, I said, sitting down at the head of the table. Now let us talk about liquidation. Little did my family know that while they were laughing over their brunch, I had just initiated a sequence of events that would leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And the best part was that tomorrow was Ebony's big influencer launch party. She was going to need a new handbag. Too bad she wouldn't be able to pay for it. The next morning, I woke up to 37 missed calls. The game had officially begun. I walked out of the phone booth and stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Chicago skyline. From up here, everything looked small. The cars were just specks and the people were invisible. That was exactly how I needed to see my family right now. Not as flesh and blood, but as liabilities on a balance sheet that needed to be written off. I unlocked my phone and dialed my executive assistant David. He picked up on the first ring. David spoke with the sharp efficiency that I paid him 6 figures for. He asked if the merger meeting was finished and if I needed the celebratory champagne prepared. I told him to forget the champagne. I told him to open the encrypted file labeled Brooks Family Trust. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard on the other end of the line. "I need you to execute a complete liquidation protocol," I said calmly. My voice did not tremble. It was the same voice I used when I ordered the dismantling of a failing subsidiary. David stopped typing. He asked me to clarify what I meant by complete. I took a breath and looked at my reflection in the glass. I started with the credit cards. I told him to cancel the American Express Platinum supplementary cards issued to Harold, Tina, and Ebony. I told him to not just cancel them, but to report them as compromised. I wanted the fraud alert system to trigger immediately. I wanted the card readers to scream declined the next time they tried to buy a $300 lunch. David hesitated for a split second. He reminded me that my mother was currently on a spa retreat that I had paid for. He asked if I wanted to wait until she checked out. I told him no. I told him that if she wanted to leave the spa, she could pay for it herself, or she could wash dishes until the debt was settled. Then I moved to the vehicles. I told David to contact the luxury leasing agency we used for the firm. I instructed him to issue an immediate recall on the Range Rover my father drove to the golf course and the G-Wagon that Ebony used as a prop for her social media photos. I wanted the repossession team sent to their coordinates within the hour. I specifically instructed that I did not want a courtesy call made to the drivers. I wanted the tow trucks to simply show up and take the assets back. David finally spoke up. His voice was quiet. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "if we do that, they will be stranded. Preston is likely at the club and Ebony is downtown. They will have no way to get home." I watched a plane cut through the clouds in the distance. I told David that Uber existed. I told him that they had legs. And then I gave him the final instruction. The one that I knew would hurt the most. I told him to access the utility accounts for the Colonial Mansion on Lakeshore Drive, the electric company, the water, the gas, the high-speed fiber optic internet. I told him to schedule an immediate disconnect for all services. I held the power of attorney for that property, which meant I had the legal right to turn off the lights whenever I wanted, and I wanted them off tonight. David took a deep breath. He asked me if I was absolutely certain. He said that this was the nuclear option. He said there was no coming back from this. I pressed my hand against the cold glass of the window. I thought about the recording. I thought about my father laughing at me. I thought about Preston calling me a guard dog. I thought about 34 years of buying affection that was never actually for sale because it never existed. "I am not just certain, David," I said. "I am overdue. I want you to make them homeless on paper. I want their credit scores to drop so fast they get whiplash. I want every single luxury they take for granted to vanish before the sun goes down. Make them homeless on paper for me. Right now." David typed one final command. He said it was done. He said the notifications were already being sent out. I hung up the phone. I smoothed down my blazer. I fixed a stray hair. I turned around and walked back toward the conference room. The 3 executives were still waiting for me. They looked nervous. They had no idea that the woman walking back into the room had just severed her own roots. I sat down at the head of the table and smiled. It was the most dangerous smile I had ever worn. "Let us finish this deal," I said. "I have some free time suddenly available in my schedule." The next morning I sat in my corner office with a double espresso and my iPad propped up on the desk. I was not looking at merger contracts. I was watching a live stream. Ebony had decided to broadcast her shopping trip to her 20,000 followers. She was standing inside the Hermès boutique on Rush Street. The lighting was perfect and she looked radiant. She was holding a Himalayan Birkin bag that cost more than most people earn in a year. "Hey guys," she chirped at the camera, posing with the bag. "Just picking up a little something for the brand launch tonight. My amazing husband says I deserve the best." She panned the camera to Preston, who was leaning against the counter wearing a suit that I had paid for 3 months ago. He winked at the camera and said, "Only the best for my queen." Crypto is booming, baby. It was a masterclass in delusion. I took a sip of my coffee and waited. I knew the sales associate. Her name was Sarah. She was a professional, but she was also terrifyingly strict about payment protocols. I watched as Ebony slapped the heavy platinum American Express card onto the glass counter. It was the supplementary card attached to my account, the card she had used to fund her entire adult life. "Wrap it up, Sarah," Ebony said dismissively. "We are in a rush." Sarah inserted the card into the chip reader. The machine thought for a second. Then it let out a long, harsh buzz. It was the sound of rejection. Ebony frowned. "Try it again. The chip is probably dusty." Sarah did not try it again. She looked at the screen and then she looked up at Ebony. Her expression was grave. "I am sorry, ma'am, but this card has been flagged. The issuer has reported it as stolen." The silence on the live stream was palpable. The comments section froze for a second before exploding with question marks. Ebony's face turned a deep shade of crimson. "Stolen," she screeched. "That is impossible. That is my card. My sister is the primary account holder. Call her." "I cannot do that, ma'am," Sarah said calmly, reaching for a pair of scissors. "Procedure dictates that I must confiscate and destroy any card reported as stolen to prevent fraud." Before Ebony could snatch it back, Sarah cut the platinum card in half. The snap of the plastic was audible even through the iPad speakers. Preston stepped forward, puffed out his chest, and tried to salvage the situation. He laughed nervously. Okay, there must be a glitch with Kendra's bank. She probably forgot to pay a bill." He looked at the camera. "Family drama, right, guys? Do not worry. I got this." He pulled out his own black card. It was a business credit card that he used for his venture capital firm. He slapped it down with the confidence of a man who owned the world. "Put it on mine, Sarah, and add a scarf for the trouble." I leaned forward in my chair. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Preston evidently forgot that his business line of credit was secured entirely by my stock portfolio. When I liquidated my support at 4:59 yesterday afternoon, his credit limit dropped from $50,000 to zero. Sarah inserted his card. The machine buzzed again. Louder this time. She looked at Preston. "Declined," she said. "The bank code says insufficient security. The account has been frozen by the guarantor." The camera shook. I realized Ebony's hand was trembling. The comments on the live stream were going wild now. People were laughing. People were asking if they were broke. Preston turned pale. "That is a mistake," he stammered. "Run it again." "I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," Sarah said, signaling to the large security guard standing by the door. "I am going to have to ask you to return the merchandise and leave the boutique. You are causing a disturbance." Ebony tried to argue, but the security guard stepped into the frame. He was 6'4" and he did not look like he cared about her influencer status. He pointed to the door. The live stream ended abruptly as Ebony fumbled to turn off the phone, but not before I saw the look of absolute terror in her eyes. It was the look of a child who realized the parents had finally gone home and left them in the dark. I closed my iPad and finished my espresso. The show was over, but the lesson had just begun. I checked my watch. The repo men were scheduled to arrive at the parking garage in exactly 10 minutes. They were about to find out that walking home in Louboutin heels is very painful. Sarah did not wait for Preston to find a third credit card. She had been briefed personally by me via a secure email at 6 in the morning. She knew exactly what was happening. She signaled the security guard again. The guard was a mountain of a man named Marcus. I knew Marcus. I had helped him with a pro bono custody case 2 years ago, and he was fiercely loyal. He moved with a heavy, purposeful silence, stepping between Preston and the counter. Marcus looked down at Ebony, who was still clutching the Himalayan Birkin bag to her chest like it was a life preserver. "Ma'am, I need you to hand over the merchandise," he said. His voice was deep and rumbled like an idling engine. It was not a request. Ebony's eyes went wide. She stepped back, knocking into a display of silk scarves. "You cannot take this," she screeched. "I already posted it. It is mine. My husband is just transferring funds." "Do you know who I am?" Preston tried to intervene, stepping in front of Marcus with a pathetic attempt at male bravado. "Hey, back off, pal," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We are calling her sister. You are making a big mistake. Do you know who Kendra Brooks is? She practically keeps this store in business. When I tell her you treated her family like criminals, she will have your badge. She will sue this entire company into the ground." The other shoppers in the boutique had stopped browsing. A woman trying on sunglasses lowered them to watch. The silence was thick and heavy. Sarah, the manager, sighed. She did not look intimidated. She looked bored. She reached under the counter and pulled out a tablet. She tapped the screen and turned it around so Ebony and Preston could see it. It was an email. The subject line read, "Immediate Security Protocol." The sender was Kendra Brooks. "Ms. Brooks is indeed a valued client," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "In fact, she is the one who flagged these cards. Her specific instructions were to confiscate any items attempted to be purchased with the unauthorized accounts and to remove the individuals from the premises immediately. She explicitly warned us that you might try to use her name to intimidate the staff." Ebony looked at the screen. She read the words. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, turned a ghostly shade of gray. The realization hit her. This was not a bank error. This was an eviction. Her grip on the bag loosened. Marcus reached out and gently took the $40,000 purse from her trembling hands. He placed it back on the velvet counter behind him. Then he pointed his gloved hand toward the glass doors. "It is time to go," Marcus said. "Now." Ebony looked around the room. She saw the other customers staring. She saw the judgmental whispers. She saw a teenage girl near the perfume section holding up her phone, recording the entire thing. Preston grabbed Ebony's arm. "Come on," he muttered, keeping his head down. "Let's go. These people are crazy." They did not walk out with dignity. Marcus escorted them, closely guiding them by the elbows like common shoplifters. As they reached the entrance, Preston tripped over the edge of the rug and stumbled, nearly falling face first into the glass door. I watched the aftermath from the comfort of my office. By the time they hit the sidewalk, the incident was already circulating. A video uploaded by a user named Fashion Killa had gone viral within 20 minutes. The caption read, "Fake influencers get kicked out of Hermes. LMAO." I scrolled through the comments. They were brutal. One comment said, "Imagine flexing a bag you cannot pay for." Another said, "Is that the guy who claims to be a crypto genius? He looks like he is crying." I took a screenshot of the video. It was a petty thing to do, but I wanted to remember the moment. For years, they had used my name to open doors. Today, I used my name to slam the door in their faces. But the humiliation was only the beginning. They still had to get home. And as I checked the GPS tracker on the repossession truck, I saw that the tow driver was currently pulling into the parking garage where their cars were waiting. The walk of shame was about to turn into a marathon. My penthouse sanctuary was violated at exactly 7 in the evening. I had given the concierge strict instructions to ban them, but apparently the night shift security guard named Gary had not checked the updated blacklist. He let them up because he was used to seeing them carry out bags of gifts that I had paid for. He thought he was doing me a favor by letting my family surprise me. The private elevator doors slid open and the noise hit me instantly. It was not a polite knock. It was an invasion. My father Harold marched in first, his face purple with rage. My mother Tina was trailing behind him, clutching a tissue to her face, sobbing loudly. Ebony and Preston brought up the rear, looking like wet dogs who had been kicked out of a warm house. Harold did not even say hello. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You ungrateful child," he bellowed. His voice echoed off the marble walls. "Do you have any idea how humiliated we were? The lights are off, Kendra. The water is off. We had to shower at the gym. How dare you treat your own flesh and blood like animals?" I was sitting on my white leather sofa wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of vintage red wine. I did not stand up. I did not offer them a seat. I did not ask them if they wanted water. I simply looked at them. To me, they no longer looked like parents. They looked like strangers who had broken into a museum. My mother threw herself onto the adjacent armchair, staining the pristine fabric with her tears. She looked at me with wide, betrayal-filled eyes. "We raised you," she wailed. "We sacrificed everything for you to become a lawyer. We gave you life. Is this how you repay us? By cutting off your mother in her old age? By making your sister cry in front of strangers? You are cold, Kendra. You have ice in your veins just like your aunt." Ebony chimed in from the back, her mascara running down her face. "You ruined my brand launch," she screamed. "Everyone is laughing at me. Preston's investors are asking questions. You are selfish. You have so much money, and you cannot even spare a few $1,000s to help your family." I took a slow sip of wine. I tasted the oak and the berries. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. They were waiting for me to apologize. They were waiting for me to scramble for my checkbook and fix it just to make the yelling stop. That was the old dynamic. That was the script we had followed for a decade. But I had burned that script yesterday. I set the glass down on the coffee table with a sharp click. I looked at my father, who was looming over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. I spoke softly, so he had to lean in to hear me. "You talk about duty," I said, my voice steady. "You talk about sacrifice. But I have seen the ledger, Dad. I have paid back every dollar you spent raising me with interest. I bought the house you sleep in. I bought the cars you drive. I bought the clothes on your back. And yesterday you laughed at me for it," Harold sputtered. "That was a private conversation," he stammered. "And this is private property," I replied. "I am not your daughter right now. I am your creditor, and you are trespassing. The security cameras are recording this. If you are not back in the elevator in 3 minutes, I will have you removed for breaking and entering. And unlike Gary, the police do have the updated list." Preston stepped forward, separating himself from the huddled group of my parents and sister. He adjusted his tie and smoothed down the lapels of his suit jacket. I noticed immediately that the suit was a knockoff. It was trying to be Armani, but the poor stitching gave it away. It was a perfect metaphor for Preston himself. A cheap imitation of success. He cleared his throat and put on his best boardroom voice. The voice he used when he was trying to convince investors to buy into his non-existent crypto schemes. "Kendra," he began, tilting his head with a look of mock sympathy. "Listen to yourself. You are being irrational. You are letting your emotions cloud your judgment. I know you are under a lot of stress at the firm, and that can make people paranoid. But you are smarter than this. You are a lawyer, for God's sake. You know better than to trust unverified digital evidence." He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space. "That recording you sent us. It is fake, Kendra. It is a complete fabrication. We never said those things. We love you. We have always supported you." My mother nodded vigorously from the armchair, wiping her eyes. "Yes, baby," she cried. "It is true. We would never call you those names. It must be a hacker." Preston seized on that. "Exactly," he said, snapping his fingers. "It is AI. Deepfake technology is everywhere now. Hackers use it to tear families apart and extort money. Someone probably cloned our voices from Ebony's social media videos and spliced that audio together to trigger you. And you fell for it. You are letting a cybercriminal destroy this family over a glitch." He laughed softly, shaking his head as if I were a child who believed in ghosts. Come on, Kendra. Think about it. Does that sound like us? Does that sound like the people who raised you? You are reacting to a computer program. You are punishing your own flesh and blood because of a digital lie. I watched him perform. It was a fascinating display of gaslighting. He was trying to make me question my own reality. He was trying to use my intelligence against me by appealing to logic while ignoring the fact that the recording contained specific details that only they would know. Like the nickname guard dog, which Preston had used to my face 3 years ago when he was drunk at Thanksgiving. He mistook my silence for agreement. He thought he was winning. His shoulders relaxed. A smug smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had talked the ATM back into service. He moved in for the kill, the physical connection, the fake intimacy designed to seal the deal. He reached out his hand toward me. Look, he said, his voice dropping to a soothing purr. Let's just forget this happened. Let's turn the lights back on and open a nice bottle of wine and laugh about how crazy technology has become. We forgive you for overreacting, Kendra. We are family. His hand hovered over my shoulder. He was going to pat me. He was going to touch me with the same hand that he used to steal from me. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply moved my arm in a sharp, violent arc, knocking his hand away before it could make contact. The sound of my hand slapping his wrist echoed in the silent penthouse. Preston recoiled, clutching his hand, looking at me in shock. Kendra, he gasped. I stood up slowly. I rose to my full height in my stilettos, towering over him. My face was stone. Do not touch me, I said. My voice was low and lethal. Do not ever put your filthy hands on my $5,000 blazer again. Preston froze. The smug smile vanished. You think I am stupid, Preston? I continued stepping toward him, forcing him to back away. You think you can use buzzwords like deepfake and AI to erase the truth, but you forget who I am. I do not just listen to evidence, I verify it. I had that audio analyzed by a forensic sound engineer this morning before I cut the power. There were no digital splices, there was no AI generation. It was a continuous analog recording. It was real. And so is my hatred. I looked over his shoulder at my parents, who were now staring at me in horror. The hacker excuse had evaporated. They were naked in their guilt. Get out, I said, pointing to the elevator. All of you. Get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud. And Preston, if you ever try to gaslight me again, I will make sure your next investment pitch is made to a cellmate in federal prison. Now move. I did not waste my breath arguing about the ethics of audio recording. In my line of work, feelings are irrelevant. Only documentation matters. I walked over to my desk, which was a slab of imported Italian marble, and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside sat a heavy black leather binder. I had been compiling it for a decade. I called it the Freedom File. I carried it back to the living area. The room was silent except for my mother's theatrical sniffles. I let the binder drop onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud that made everyone jump. The sound echoed off the high ceilings like a gavel striking a bench. What is that? My father asked, staring at the leather cover. I sat back down and crossed my legs. That is the ledger, I said. That is the itemized receipt of my affection. I reached forward and flipped it open. I pointed to the first page. November 2018. Dr. Stein's Clinic. Rhinoplasty and chin implant for Ebony. $15,000. Ebony gasped and instinctively touched her nose. That was a birthday gift, she stammered. I did not respond. I did not. I just turned the page. March 2020. Seed funding for Preston's revolutionary app that was supposed to replace Uber but never even made it to the App Store. $250,000. Wire transferred directly to your personal account. Preston shifted uncomfortably in his cheap suit, avoiding my eyes. It was a market correction, he muttered. Startups fail, Kendra. That is business. I ignored him and kept turning pages. The sound of the paper crinkling was the only noise in the room. It was the sound of their secrets being laid bare. Page 42. Country Club membership fees for Harold Brooks. $18,000 a year for 5 years. Page 56. Mom's trips to Bali, Paris, and Tulum to find herself. I stood up and looked down at them. I did not yell. I spoke with the calm finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. I did the math this morning, I said. Over the last 10 years, I have transferred exactly $2.4 million into this family. I paid for the roof over your heads. I paid for the food in your stomachs. I even paid for the faces you are wearing right now. My mother started to sob again. We are family, Kendra. You do not keep score with family. I do, I replied. I keep score when the other team is cheating. For 10 years, that $2.4 million was the price of admission. It was the tax I paid to be part of this family. It was the cost of buying a little bit of peace and pretending that you actually loved me. I closed the binder with a sharp snap. But as of yesterday, the price of peace has become too high. The contract is void. That money is gone. I am writing it off as a bad debt, but the bank is now closed. I looked at Preston, who was sweating profusely. You have exactly 24 hours to figure out how to pay for your own lifestyle. Because if you think $2.4 million is a lot, wait until you see how much it costs to defend yourself in court when I sue you for embezzlement. Now get out. Preston stared at the leather binder on the table. The numbers were irrefutable. $2.4 million. Most men would have felt shame. Most men would have apologized. But Preston was not a man. He was a parasite, and parasites do not feel shame. They only feel hunger. When he looked up at me, the mask of the concerned brother-in-law had vanished completely. In its place was something ugly and desperate. He realized that the emotional manipulation had failed. He realized that I was not going to be guilt-tripped into reopening the bank vault. So he decided to change tactics. If he could not charm me, he would destroy me. He straightened his spine and buttoned his jacket. He let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded more like a bark. You think you are so smart, Kendra, he sneered. You think because you sit in a glass tower and move money around that you are untouchable. But you forgot one thing. You are a public figure. You are a partner at one of the biggest law firms in the city. Your reputation is your currency. He began to pace around the living room, waving his hands theatrically. My parents watched him with wide, confused eyes, not understanding that their golden son-in-law was about to declare war on their meal ticket. There are laws in this state, Kendra Preston continued, his voice rising in volume. Laws about duty of care, laws about elder abuse. You established a precedent of support. You made your elderly parents dependent on you for their survival. And now you are cutting them off without notice. In the eyes of the law, that is abandonment. That is abuse. He stopped pacing and pointed a finger at me. I will sue you. I will drag you to family court. And I will not stop there. I have friends at the Chicago Tribune. I have connections at the Bar Association. Imagine the headlines. Top M&A lawyer leaves elderly parents to starve in the dark while she sips vintage wine in her penthouse. How many clients will you have left after I am done painting you as a monster? I will have you disbarred, Kendra. I will ruin you. My mother gasped. Preston, no, she whispered. But Preston ignored her. He was high on his own adrenaline. He thought he had found my weak spot. He thought I would be terrified of a public scandal. He smiled a cruel, twisted smile. Or he said, lowering his voice, you can reactivate the cards. You can pay off the house. And you can write me a check for $50,000 as a consulting fee for my stress. It is your choice, sis. Reputation or money. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the slight tremor in his hands. I saw the redness in his eyes. He was not a confident man making a threat. He was a cornered rat baring his teeth. I did not feel fear. I felt amusement. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I swirled the red liquid around, looking at the legs running down the side of the glass. Then I set it down. "Preston," I said softly, "you are absolutely adorable when you try to pretend you know the law. Duty of care applies to nursing homes and legal guardians. It does not apply to a 34-year-old daughter tired of funding her father's golf habit." I stood up and walked toward him. He held his ground, but I saw his eyes flicker. "But since we are talking about debts and legal issues," I continued, "let us talk about your portfolio. You told my parents you invest in crypto. You told Ebony you were a venture capitalist. But my private investigator found something very different." Preston turned pale. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I am talking about online poker." "Preston," I said, my voice ice cold, "I am talking about the $45,000 you lost last month on a website hosted in Malta. And more importantly, I am talking about the $30,000 you borrowed from a loan shark in North Chicago to try and win it back." The room went deathly silent. Ebony looked at her husband. Her mouth fell open. "You threatened to go to the Chicago Tribune," I said, stepping closer to him until I was inches from his face. "But I think you should be more worried about the men you owe money to." "I know who they are, Preston. They do not sue people. They do not write articles. They break legs. And since I just cut off your access to my money, I am very curious to see how you plan to pay them when they come knocking on your door next week." Preston looked like he was going to vomit. His arrogance collapsed instantly. He looked at my parents, then at Ebony, then back at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "You want to ruin my reputation? Go ahead," I whispered. "But I suggest you focus on saving your kneecaps first. Now get out of my sight before I decide to forward my investigator's file to your bookie. I hear he is looking for you." The elevator ride down from the penthouse must have been suffocating. I imagined them standing in that small metal box, surrounded by the mirrored walls, forcing them to look at their own reflections. They were angry and humiliated, but they still had one thing left, or so they thought. They still had the matte black Mercedes G-Wagon waiting in the valet circle. It was Preston's pride and joy, the car he used to convince strangers that he was a crypto millionaire. But when the elevator doors slid open into the lobby, the first thing they saw was not the valet holding the door open. They saw the flashing amber strobe lights of a heavy-duty tow truck. The harsh yellow light bounced off the polished marble floors and illuminated the horrified faces of the building staff. Preston sprinted out the automatic doors. His shout echoed through the driveway. "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get away from that truck!" The G-Wagon was already hooked up. The back wheels were off the ground and the winch was groaning as it pulled the 3-ton beast up onto the flatbed. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit was securing the chains. He was huge. He looked like he ate bricks for breakfast. Preston did not care about the size of the man. He was fueled by adrenaline and the terror of losing his last status symbol. He rushed at the repo agent, grabbing his arm. "Put it down. That is my car. I will sue you for damages. Do you know how much those rims cost?" The repo agent did not even flinch. He simply shook his arm and Preston stumbled back like a child running into a wall. The man turned around slowly. He held a metal clipboard in his hand. "Step back, sir," the agent said. His voice was bored. He had done this 1,000 times. "Do not make me call the cops for interfering with a lawful repossession." "Lawful," Preston screamed. His voice cracked. "This is theft. I am calling my lawyer. That vehicle is leased under the Brooks Family Trust. You have no right." The agent looked down at his clipboard. He flipped a page. "Actually, sir, I have every right. I have a direct work order here issued 20 minutes ago. The lease agreement has been terminated due to a breach of contract, and the primary account holder has requested immediate asset recovery." He ripped a pink carbon copy sheet off the clipboard and held it out to Preston. Preston stared at the paper. He did not want to take it. Taking it meant accepting reality. "Read it," the agent said, shoving the paper into Preston's chest. Owner listed as Kendra Brooks. Status listed as unauthorized use. The lady said you are no longer insured to drive this vehicle. Ebony ran up behind Preston. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. "Preston, stop!" she cried. "Everyone is watching." And they were. The residents of my building were coming home from work, stepping out of their own luxury cars and watching the spectacle. They saw the man who claimed to be a venture capitalist screaming at a tow truck driver while his wife cried in a designer dress she could not pay for. Preston crumbled. He looked at the car as it was fully hoisted onto the truck. He looked at the agent. "But how do we get home?" he whispered. "We live in the suburbs. It is a 40-minute drive." The agent climbed into the driver's seat of the tow truck and slammed the door. "That sounds like a personal problem, buddy," he said through the open window. He revved the engine. The diesel fumes blew directly into Preston's face. With a loud clank of gears, the truck began to move. Preston watched as his ego, his identity, and his ride home disappeared around the corner. My father, Harold, walked up to them. He looked old and tired. "Well," he said, "I guess we are calling an Uber." Preston checked his pockets. He pulled out his phone. His face went white. "I cannot," he muttered. "My Uber account is linked to the Platinum card. The one Kendra just canceled." They stood there on the curb under the flashing lights of the building entrance. 4 adults dressed in expensive clothes with absolutely no way to move. I watched it all from my balcony 40 floors up. They looked like ants, and for the first time in my life I did not feel the urge to go down there and save them. I just finished my wine and went inside. It was almost 9 o'clock at night when a dented Toyota Corolla pulled up to the curb outside the Colonial Mansion on Lakeshore Drive. My parents were in the back seat. They were used to being driven in climate-controlled leather interiors with tinted windows. Tonight they were squeezed into a compact car that smelled faintly of stale fast food. The driver did not open the door for them. He simply waited for them to get out so he could pick up his next fare. My father, Harold, stepped out onto the sidewalk and stared at the house. Usually at this hour, the estate was a beacon of light. I paid for landscape lighting that illuminated the manicured hedges and the architectural columns. I paid for the smart home system that automatically adjusted the interior amber glow to create a welcoming atmosphere. But tonight, the house was not a beacon. It was a black hole. The entire property was plunged into total darkness. It looked like a tomb sitting in the middle of a neighborhood that was blazing with life. The houses on either side were lit up like Christmas trees, but the Brooks residence was invisible against the night sky. My mother, Tina, stumbled out of the car, clutching her purse. "Why is it so dark?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Is there a power outage in the neighborhood?" Harold looked left and then right. The neighbors clearly had power. He muttered something about a blown fuse and marched toward the front gate. He punched the code into the keypad. Nothing happened. The electronic lock was dead. They had to force the heavy iron gate open manually, pushing against the rusted hinges that had not been used by hand in years. They walked up the long driveway in the dark, tripping over the cobblestones they usually drove over in their luxury SUVs. When they finally unlocked the front door, the silence inside was deafening. A house that size makes noises when it is alive. The hum of the refrigerator, the whir of the central air conditioning, the soft beep of the security system. But now there was nothing. Just a heavy, stagnant silence. Harold flipped the light switch in the foyer. Click. Nothing. He flipped it again harder, as if force could generate electricity. "It is just a breaker," Harold said. His voice echoed in the dark hallway. "I will go to the basement and check the box." He fumbled for his phone to use the flashlight, but his battery was in the red. He had forgotten to charge it at the penthouse because he was too busy screaming at me. While he stumbled toward the basement, my mother made her way to the kitchen. She wanted a glass of water to calm her nerves. She reached for the filtered water dispenser on the fridge. She pressed the lever. Nothing came out. The electronic pump was dead. She opened the refrigerator door, hoping for the light to come on. It remained dark. And then the smell hit her. It was not a strong smell yet, but it was the distinct scent of warming air in a confined space. The freezer had been off for hours. Inside that sub-zero refrigerator, which cost more than most cars, was $3,000 worth of organic meat, imported cheese, and vintage caviar. It was all beginning to sweat. The ice cream was turning into soup. The Wagyu beef was reaching room temperature. Tina began to panic. She grabbed a bottle of expensive mineral water from the pantry and tried to turn on the faucet to wash a glass. No water. I had cut the municipal water supply too. Harold came back up from the basement. He looked defeated. "The breakers are fine," he said quietly. "The main line has been severed. The smart meter is off." He looked at my mother in the dim light of the moon filtering through the windows. "She did it," he whispered. "She actually did it. She turned us off." For the first time in their lives, they were not angry. They were terrified. They stood in the middle of the dark, silent kitchen, surrounded by melting luxury, realizing that without my signature, they were just two old people standing in a very expensive box, with no air, no water, and no light. And the temperature inside the house was already beginning to drop. It was just past midnight when the heavy antique knocker on the front door began to slam against the wood. In the pitch-black house, the sound was terrifying. It sounded like a sledgehammer hitting the oak. My father, Harold, was sitting on the living room sofa, wrapped in a blanket, trying to conserve heat. He jumped up. My mother grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his skin. She asked who it could be at this hour. She hoped it was the electric company coming to turn the lights back on. Harold grabbed a heavy brass candlestick for protection and made his way to the foyer, using his dying phone flashlight to guide his steps. He unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a crack. He did not find a utility worker. He found 3 men standing on the porch. They were not wearing uniforms. They were wearing thick leather jackets, and they looked like they had been carved out of granite. The man in the center pushed the door open, forcing my father back with a casual strength that was terrifying to witness. He did not ask for permission to enter. He stepped into the foyer and shone a bright tactical flashlight into my father's face, blinding him. "We are looking for Preston," the man rumbled. His voice was like gravel in a blender. Harold stammered, blinking in the harsh light. He tried to muster some of his usual authority. He asked who they were and told them to leave his private property immediately. The man laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He said they were business associates from North Chicago. He said Preston owed them $50,000 plus interest, and the payment was due at midnight. Preston came running down the stairs. He had heard the noise. When he saw the men standing in the foyer, his face went from pale to translucent. He stopped halfway down the steps, gripping the banister like he was about to faint. "Gentlemen," Preston squeaked. His voice was an octave higher than usual. "There is a misunderstanding. My funds are currently tied up in an international transfer. I just need a few more days to liquidate some assets." The lead thug shook his head. He looked at my father with a look of mock confusion. He said that when Preston borrowed the money, he claimed that his father-in-law, Harold Brooks, was a wealthy man who would guarantee the loan. He said Preston had explicitly used the Brooks family name and address as collateral. My father froze. He looked at Preston. The realization hit him harder than the cold air rushing in through the open door. His golden son-in-law had not just leached off my money for years. He had leveraged Harold's safety and reputation to gamble with criminals. Preston rushed down the rest of the stairs, trying to put himself between the men and my father. He put on a fake smile, but his lips were trembling. "It is just a liquidity issue," he lied, waving his hands nervously. "A simple business misunderstanding, Harold. These gentlemen are just eager investors who are passionate about their returns." The thug stepped forward and grabbed Preston by the lapel of his cheap suit. He slammed him against the wall. A picture frame fell and shattered on the floor. "This is not an investment," the man snarled, leaning into Preston's face. "This is a collection. You have 48 hours, Preston. or we start taking payment in broken bones, and since your father-in-law is the guarantor, maybe we will start with him." The men turned and walked out into the night, leaving the front door wide open. My parents stood in the dark, cold hallway, staring at the man they had chosen over me. The hero of the family was currently curled up on the rug weeping while the reality of their situation came crashing down. The darkness in the house was no longer just an inconvenience. It was now a hiding place. The call came at 2:15 in the morning. My mother was screaming so loud that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Harold is dying," she wailed. His heart gave out. "You killed him, Kendra. The stress you caused him stopped his heart. Come to Mercy Hospital now." Most daughters would have panicked. Most daughters would have thrown on a coat over their pajamas and rushed to the emergency room with tears in their eyes. But I was not most daughters. I was a litigator who knew that my father's only heart condition was a chronic lack of empathy. I did not rush. I took a shower. I put on a fresh navy blue power suit. And then I made one phone call. Not to a priest, but to Dr. Evans. He was a concierge physician who specialized in executive health. I paid him a retainer of $10,000 a month to be available for me. Tonight, I needed him to be a lie detector. When I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, Dr. Evans was waiting for me at the entrance with his medical bag. We walked into the emergency room together. My mother saw me and ran over. She looked wild. Her hair was messy, and she was clutching her purse. "Thank God you are here," she cried. "They need a credit card for the admission deposit. Our insurance lapsed last month because the auto pay was linked to your card. Give them your card, Kendra. Save your father." I ignored her outstretched hand. "Where is he?" I asked. She pointed to curtain number 3. I walked in. Harold was lying on the gurney, clutching his chest and moaning theatrically. When he saw me, he let out a gasp. "You came," he wheezed. "I knew you would not let your old man die. I forgive you, Kendra. Just pay the doctors so we can go home." He looked convincing. He was sweating and his face was pale. But I noticed that he was still wearing his gold watch. He had not even changed into a hospital gown yet. Dr. Evans stepped forward. He did not say a word. He simply picked up the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. He scanned the vitals. He looked at the EKG monitor. He took out his stethoscope and listened to my father's chest for a long, uncomfortable minute. Harold looked nervous. "Who is this?" he asked. "This is my private physician," I said. "I want a second opinion before I authorize any payments." Dr. Evans pulled the stethoscope out of his ears. He looked at me, and then he looked at Harold with a flat, unimpressed expression. "Mr. Brooks," he said clearly so everyone could hear. "Your heart rate is 72. Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, but within normal range for a man of your age. The EKG shows a perfect sinus rhythm. There is absolutely no evidence of myocardial infarction." My mother stopped crying instantly. "What are you saying?" she snapped. "He is in pain. Look at him." Dr. Evans glanced at the nurse who was standing in the corner trying not to laugh. Based on the distension of his abdomen and the sulfurous smell on his breath, I would diagnose this as acute acid reflux, likely caused by eating spoiled food. I looked at my father. He stopped clutching his chest. "Spoiled food," I repeated. "Oh, that makes sense. Because I cut the power to the house 6 hours ago. You probably ate the warm shrimp from the freezer, didn't you, Dad?" Harold sat up. The act was over. He looked furious. "So what if it is gas?" he shouted. "I thought I was dying. The pain was real." "You still have to pay the bill, Kendra. We have no insurance." I laughed. It was a cold, dark sound. "I am not paying $2,000 for a tummy ache, Harold. You wanted to play the victim so badly that you poisoned yourself with rotten seafood. That is poetic justice." I turned to the nurse. "Discharge him, and send the bill to the address on file. They can pay it when they sell the furniture." I walked out of the ER with Dr. Evans. Behind me, I could hear my father screaming, not in pain, but in rage. He had played his last ace card, and I had trumped it with a stethoscope. They were not just broke and hungry now, they were also healthy, which meant they had no excuse not to suffer the consequences of their actions. The subpoena arrived at my office at 10 in the morning. I was in the middle of a briefing with my junior associates when the receptionist knocked on the glass door. She looked pale. Behind her stood a man in a windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. In the corporate world, getting served with legal papers is not uncommon, but usually it involves mergers or contract disputes. It rarely involves a man who smells like stale cigarettes handing you a summons in front of your entire team. "Ms. Brooks," the man said, thrusting the envelope into my hands. "You have been served." I waited until he left before I opened it. My hands were steady, but my jaw was clenched so tight my teeth hurt. I pulled out the document. It was not a lawsuit from a rival company. It was a civil complaint filed in the Cook County Family Court. The plaintiffs were listed as Harold and Tina Brooks. The defendant was me. I scanned the pages. The legal argument was clumsy and riddled with typos which told me immediately that Preston was behind this. He had clearly found a bottom-feeder lawyer. I looked at the signature block. The attorney representing my parents was a man named Barry Henderson. I knew that name. He was a strip mall lawyer who advertised on the back of bus benches and specialized in slip-and-fall cases. He was cheap, loud, and willing to sign anything for a retainer. The lawsuit was claiming damages under the Filial Responsibility Act. It was an obscure and rarely enforced state statute that theoretically required adult children to provide for their destitute parents. Preston had clearly spent all night on Google looking for a loophole. The complaint was a work of fiction. It claimed that I had entered into a verbal contract to support my parents for life, and that my sudden withdrawal of funds had caused them mental anguish and immediate financial peril. It stated that because of my reliance, they had not saved for retirement, and therefore I was liable for their living expenses. They were suing me for $5,000 a month in maintenance, plus a lump sum of $200,000 for emotional distress. But the real danger was on page 4. It was a motion for an emergency injunction. Preston and his cheap lawyer were asking the judge to freeze my personal bank accounts until the case was resolved to ensure that I did not hide assets. It was a shakedown, pure and simple. Preston knew he would likely lose in a real trial. He knew the statute was weak, but he also knew that a lawsuit takes months to resolve. If he could get a judge to freeze my accounts for even 30 days, he could force me to the negotiating table. He was trying to choke me out. He wanted me to settle just to get access to my own money again. I looked up from the papers. My associates were pretending to work, but I knew they were terrified. They had never seen a partner get sued by her own parents. I walked to my desk and picked up the phone. I did not call my parents. There was nothing left to say to them. Instead, I dialed the number of the fiercest litigation attorney in Chicago, a woman named Patricia who ate men like Barry Henderson for breakfast. "Patricia," I said when she answered, "I just got served a frivolous lawsuit by my parents. They are trying to freeze my assets using a filial support statute." Patricia laughed. It was a sharp, dangerous sound. "Send it over, Kendra," she said. "I have not destroyed a bus bench lawyer in months. This will be fun." I hung up. Preston thought he had made a clever chess move. He thought using the law against a lawyer was a good idea. He was about to find out that he had brought a plastic knife to a gunfight. I thought the lawsuit was the bottom of the barrel, but I was wrong. Preston and Ebony had brought a shovel, and they were digging deeper. 2 hours after the process server left my office, my phone began to buzz. It was not a text message or a call. It was a relentless stream of notifications from social media. I opened TikTok and saw that my name was trending. Not Kendra Brooks, the lawyer, but Kendra Brooks, the monster. Ebony had posted a 3-part video series titled "The Truth About My Millionaire Sister." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had clearly filmed it in the living room of the colonial mansion during the day, using the natural gloom of the unlit house to set the mood. Gone was her usual heavy makeup and designer jewelry. She was wearing an old oversized gray sweatshirt, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked small, fragile, and destitute. I watched the first video in silence. Ebony sat cross-legged on the floor holding a single candle. She looked into the camera with tear-filled eyes. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "I usually post about fashion and fun, but today I have to be real with you. My family is in crisis. My father just had a heart attack and we came home from the hospital to find that my sister had cut off our power and water." She panned the camera around the dark room. "We are sitting here in the cold. My parents are elderly. They are sick. And my sister, who makes millions of dollars a year defending corrupt corporations, decided to punish us because we asked her for help. She abandoned us. She wants us to starve." The video cut to a clip of my mother crying softly in the background. It was likely staged, but it looked devastatingly real to the untrained eye. I scrolled to the comments. There were thousands of them, and they were vicious. One user wrote, "This is disgusting, I hope she gets disbarred." Another wrote, "Eat the rich, she clearly forgot where she came from." A third comment simply said, "Let us find out where she works and make her pay." Ebony had weaponized her audience. She used hashtags like elder abuse and toxic family to boost the algorithm. In the second video, she even tagged my law firm and the Chicago Bar Association, demanding justice for her suffering parents. But the final insult was in the bio of her profile. She had set up a GoFundMe page titled, "Help the Brooks Family Survive Winter." The goal was set at $50,000. In just 2 hours, gullible strangers had already donated $4,000. I sat in my leather chair and felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a targeted assassination of my character. Ebony knew that in the court of public opinion, facts did not matter. Only feelings mattered. And she was painting a picture where she was Cinderella and I was the wicked stepmother. My interoffice phone rang. It was the receptionist. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice trembling. "The switchboard is lighting up. We are getting hundreds of calls. People are screaming at us. They are calling you a predator." I looked at the screen of my iPhone, where Ebony was now fake crying about having no food in the fridge, despite the fact that I knew she had a hidden stash of cash that could easily buy groceries. She was not starving. She was feeding on the attention. She was destroying my career for clicks and donations. I did not reply to the comments. I did not delete my account. I simply took a screenshot of the GoFundMe page. Ebony had just made a fatal error. By soliciting money based on a fraudulent story, she had crossed the line from defamation into wire fraud. She wanted to play the victim for an audience. Fine. I would make sure her next audience was a jury of her peers. The walk from the elevator bank to my corner office usually felt like a victory lap. For 5 years, I had walked these halls as the highest billing partner in the firm. Junior associates would lower their heads in respect, and paralegals would scramble to get out of my way. I was the queen of Sterling and Cooper. But this morning the atmosphere had changed. The silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. I saw the whispers. I saw the interns huddled around a smartphone watching Ebony's video and giggling before quickly putting it away when they saw me coming. I saw the receptionist avoid eye contact, pretending to be busy with a file that was upside down. My reputation, which I had spent a decade building brick by brick, was being dismantled by a girl who had never worked a day in her life. When I reached my desk, my keycard did not work on the electronic lock. The light blinked red. Access denied. Before I could try again, my administrative assistant David appeared. He looked miserable. He did not look me in the eye. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you," David whispered. "In the conference room, now." Charles Sterling was the managing partner of the firm. He was a man who valued 2 things above all else: billable hours and discretion. He did not care about personal lives unless they impacted the bottom line. And today, my personal life was impacting the bottom line. I walked into the conference room. Charles was standing by the window looking out at the city. On the large mahogany table sat a tablet. On the screen was a paused image of Ebony crying in the dark. "Sit down," Kendra Charles said without turning around. His voice was devoid of warmth. I sat. "Charles, I can explain," I began. "This is a family dispute. It has nothing to do with my ability to practice law. It is a smear campaign orchestrated by my brother-in-law to extort money." Charles turned around. He looked tired. He tapped the tablet screen. "We represent Fortune 500 companies, Kendra. We represent conservative banks and family values organizations. We cannot have a senior partner trending on social media for elder abuse. The optics are disastrous." He slid a file across the table toward me. "We have already received calls from 3 major clients this morning expressing concern about your character. They are asking if the allegations in the lawsuit are true. They are asking if they can trust their assets with a woman who allegedly abandons her own sick parents." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I will sue them for defamation," I said. "I will clear my name." "And you should," Charles said, "but you cannot do it while representing this firm. The board met an hour ago. We have decided to place you on indefinite administrative leave, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. Suspension. It was the corporate equivalent of a death sentence. "You are taking me off the merger," I whispered. "The deal I had spent 6 months constructing." "Simon will take over the TechStream merger," Charles said. "You are to hand over your files and your company phone. Your access to the server has already been revoked." I stood up. My legs felt weak. I had lost my family 2 days ago. And now in the span of 10 minutes I had lost my career. I had lost my identity. I handed Charles my phone. I placed my ID badge on the table. "Go home, Kendra." Charles said softly, "Fix this mess. Because if you cannot fix it, do not bother coming back." I walked out of the building carrying a single box of personal items. I walked past the security guards who used to salute me. I walked out into the cold Chicago wind. I stood on the sidewalk feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. Preston and Ebony wanted to destroy me. And looking at my reflection in the glass doors of the building I was banned from entering, it looked like they had finally succeeded. I had nothing left to lose. Which meant I had nothing left to hold me back. For 3 days my penthouse was a fortress of silence. The blinds were drawn tight against the Chicago skyline. My main phone was turned off, buried in a drawer somewhere in the bedroom. To the outside world it looked like a surrender. The tabloids were already running stories about my mental breakdown. My former colleagues were likely whispering that the pressure had finally cracked the Ice Queen. Even Ebony posted a smug update on Instagram, claiming that her prayers for my humility were being answered. They were all wrong. I was not hiding. I was hunting. The only light in my living room came from the glow of 3 monitors I had set up on the dining table. The air smelled of espresso and printer ink. Sitting across from me was not a therapist, but a man named Vance. Vance was a private investigator who used to work for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He did not come cheap, but unlike my family, he delivered results that were actually worth the money. Vance took a sip of black coffee and slid a heavy black USB drive across the marble table. The sound of plastic sliding on stone was the only noise in the room. "You were right, Kendra," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It is worse than we thought. Your brother-in-law is not just a bad investor. He is a criminal." I plugged the drive into my laptop. Files began to populate the screen. Bank statements, surveillance photos, casino logs. I clicked on the folder labeled Preston. Vance leaned forward and pointed at the screen. "Preston has been running a classic Ponzi scheme," Vance explained. "The money he took from your parents to invest in his tech startup never went to a business account. It went directly to an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. But here is the catch. The account is empty." I frowned. Where did the money go? Vance clicked another file. It opened a spreadsheet detailing transaction histories from a website called Ace High Poker. He gambled at Kendra. All of it. The seed money. The loans he took out in your name. Even the cash from the refinancing of your parents' house. He has lost over $400,000 in 6 months. And the people he owes money to are not banks. They are the kind of people who solve late payments with baseball bats. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. This was not just leverage. This was a nuclear weapon. What about my parents? I asked. Vance hesitated. He looked at me with something that almost resembled pity. Then he opened the second folder. Your parents are not just victims of Preston, he said. They are accomplices in their own way. I dug into the archives like you asked. I found the settlement documents from your car accident when you were 14. The insurance company paid out $500,000 for your injuries and rehabilitation. I stared at the screen. I never saw a dime of that money, I whispered. They told me the insurance claim was denied. Vance shook his head. They forged your signature on the release form, Kendra. They took the money and used it to pay off the mortgage on the colonial house. The house they claim is their legacy. It was bought with your pain. I sat back in my chair. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was electric. For years I had felt guilty for cutting them off. I had wondered if I was too harsh. But now, looking at the digital trail of their betrayal, I realized I had not been harsh enough. I looked at Vance. Do we have enough for a criminal indictment? Vance nodded. We have enough to put Preston away for 20 years. And we have enough to charge your parents with grand larceny and fraud. I closed the laptop. The blue light vanished, leaving us in the dim glow of the city outside. Good, I said, standing up. My breakdown is officially over. It is time to go to work. I walked to the window and opened the blinds. The sun was rising over Lake Michigan. It was a new day, and for my family it was going to be the beginning of the end. They wanted a reaction from me. They wanted a fight. I was going to give them a war. The candlelight flickered on the dining room table, casting long dancing shadows against the walls of the cold, dark mansion. It had been 4 days since I cut the power, and my parents were living like squatters in their own home. They were wrapped in layers of blankets, shivering not just from the lack of heating, but from a deep, permeating fear. Preston sat across from them. He looked exhausted. His cheap suit was wrinkled, and he had dark circles under his eyes. But there was a frantic energy vibrating beneath his skin. He was a desperate man running out of time, but he was also a con artist. And con artists are most dangerous when they are cornered. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen to me, he said, looking from Harold to Tina. We have her. I spoke to a contact at the courthouse today. Kendra is terrified. She put on a brave face, but she is scrambling. That suspension from her firm hit her hard. She is bleeding money, and she knows she cannot win a public battle against her own ailing parents. She is on the ropes. My father Harold coughed. He looked weak. But if she is losing, why are we still sitting in the dark, Preston? Why do I not have hot water? Preston slammed his hand softly on the table. Because she is stalling, Harold. She is trying to starve you out before the court date. That is her strategy. She wants you to give up. She wants you to crawl back to her and beg for forgiveness so she can control you again. Do you want that? Do you want to go back to being her pets? My mother shook her head vigorously. No, she whispered. Never. She humiliated us. Exactly, Preston said. But to deliver the knockout blow, we need to upgrade our arsenal. Barry is a fine lawyer, but he is small time. To destroy a partner at Sterling and Cooper, we need a shark. I found a firm in downtown Chicago. They specialize in high-profile family litigation. They can get the assets frozen within 48 hours. They can get the power turned back on by court order by Friday. Harold's eyes lit up. Then do it, Preston. Hire them. Preston hesitated. He looked down at his hands, then back up at them with a look of pained reluctance. That is the problem, he said. Sharks are expensive. They require a retainer of $50,000 upfront. And since Kendra locked my accounts, I cannot access my capital until next week. The room went silent. $50,000 was a fortune to two people who had not paid a bill in 10 years. We do not have that kind of money, Harold said, his shoulders slumping. Preston leaned in closer. You do have it, Harold. You are sitting inside it. He gestured to the dark walls around them. This house. This is the one thing Kendra does not own. This is your legacy. Your father left this to you free and clear. It is worth at least $2 million. And right now it is just sitting here doing nothing. Harold looked alarmed. You want me to sell the house? No, Preston said quickly. Absolutely not. I would never ask you to sell your legacy. I am talking about a short-term bridge loan. A mortgage. We borrow against the equity just for a few months. We take out enough to hire the lawyers and pay off the bills. Once we win the lawsuit and Kendra is forced to pay you millions in damages, we pay off the loan immediately. It is zero risk, Harold. It is just using your asset to fight for your rights. Harold looked at Tina. He looked at the peeling wallpaper. He looked at the darkness that terrified him. He was a proud man who had been stripped of his dignity. Preston was offering him a sword to fight back. He did not know that the sword was actually a shovel to dig his own grave. I suppose it makes sense, Harold said slowly. It is just a loan. Just until we win. Preston smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just sensed the trap snapping shut. Exactly, he said, pulling a document out of his briefcase. I took the liberty of preparing the paperwork. It is a standard agreement with a private lender. Fast approval. We can have the cash by tomorrow morning. Just sign here and we can end Kendra's reign of terror once and for all. Harold took the pen. His hand shook in the cold air. He signed his name on the line that Preston pointed to. He thought he was signing for justice. In reality, he was signing away the only roof he had left over his head. The document sat in the center of the mahogany dining table, illuminated only by the flashlight beam from Preston's phone. It was a thick stack of papers stapled together with a cover sheet that bore the logo of a private equity firm called Omnicorp Financial. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard loan agreement. To a lawyer like me, it would have screamed predatory lending. But I was not there. The only lawyer in this room was the ghost of my grandfather who had worked 3 jobs to buy this land, and he was undoubtedly screaming from the grave. Harold held the pen hovering over the signature line. His hand was trembling. It might have been the freezing temperature of the unheated house, or it might have been his instinct trying to warn him one last time. He looked up at Preston. His eyes were watery and red. Are you absolutely sure about this? Preston Harold asked, his voice barely a whisper. This house is all we have left. If we lose this, we are on the street. Your mother and I cannot survive that. Preston did not flinch. He put a warm, reassuring hand on Harold's shoulder. He was playing the role of the savior perfectly. Harold. Look at me, Preston said softly. We are not losing the house, we are leveraging it. This is how wealthy people operate. We use static assets to generate liquid capital. It is just a bridge loan. In 3 months, when the court forces Kendra to pay us the settlement plus damages, we pay this off in full. It is just a formality to get the lights back on and hire the legal team we deserve. Harold still hesitated. He looked at the interest rate on page 3. It was 24%. Even in his desperation, he knew that was usury. Tina, my mother wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. She was shivering violently. Harold, please, she chattered. It is so cold. I just want the heat back on. Preston says it is safe. Ebony chimed in from the other side of the table. She was scrolling through her phone, probably blocking haters on Instagram. Oh my God, Daddy, just sign it, she snapped. You are acting like Preston is a stranger. He is a crypto genius. Do you know how much his portfolio went up last month? He made like 50 grand in a week. She looked at Preston with adoration, completely unaware that the 50 grand she was referencing was actually money he had stolen from her own trust fund. Preston nodded smoothly. Exactly. My assets are just tied up in the blockchain right now, Harold. I need 30 days to unstake them without penalty. This loan just covers the gap. Think of it as me borrowing from myself. Harold looked at his wife shivering in the dark. He looked at his daughter, who believed her husband was the next Elon Musk. And then he looked at the cold, dark corners of the home he was too proud to admit he could no longer afford. Desperation creates a very specific kind of blindness. It makes you see hope where there is only a trap. I trust you, son, Harold whispered. He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of the ballpoint pen on the page was loud in the silent house. He signed his name. Then he passed the pen to Tina. She signed without reading a single word. Preston snatched the papers away the moment the ink was dry. He tucked them into his briefcase with a speed that should have been alarming. Done, he said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. I will run this over to the agent tonight. We should have the funds wired by tomorrow morning. You did the right thing, Harold. Kendra thinks she has won. But you just authorized the war chest that is going to take her down. Harold forced a weak smile. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. He thought he had just bought his dignity back. He did not realize that he had just signed a confession of judgment with a shark who would sell the siding off the house the moment the first payment was missed. And with Preston in charge, that payment was already missed before the ink was even dry. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the colonial mansion, but the real warmth came from the glowing screen of Ebony's iPhone. It was 9:15 in the morning. The notification she had been praying for finally appeared. A deposit of $300,000 from Omnicorp Financial had cleared into the joint checking account she shared with Preston. Ebony let out a scream of delight that echoed through the empty house. She ran into the kitchen where my parents were huddled over a camping stove trying to boil water for instant coffee. Look, she shouted, shoving the phone into Harold's face. We are rich again. The loan came through. We can hire the lawyers. We can pay the bills. We can crush Kendra. My mother. Tina began to cry tears of relief. She hugged Preston, who was standing by the counter, furiously typing on his laptop. You saved us, Preston, she sobbed. You are a miracle worker. I knew we could trust you. Preston did not hug her back. He was focused. His eyes were darting across the screen of his MacBook. He was sweating despite the cold temperature of the house. He mumbled something about needing to secure the asset immediately. Listen to me, Preston said, his voice tight. We cannot leave this money in a standard checking account. Kendra has eyes everywhere. If she sees this balance, she will file an emergency motion to freeze it before we can hire the legal team. We need to move it to my secured investment vault. It is encrypted. She cannot touch it there. Ebony nodded vigorously. She would have believed him if he told her the moon was made of cheese. Do it, baby, she said. Protect our money. I was watching this unfold from my apartment across the city, not visually but digitally. Vance and I were monitoring the account activity in real time thanks to a keylogger we had installed on Preston's laptop months ago during a family barbecue. I watched the screen as Preston initiated the transfer. He did not send the money to a law firm. He did not send it to the electric company to turn the power back on. He typed in a routing number for a bank in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary was listed as Blue Horizon Ventures, LLC. It was a shell company. A ghost entity. Vance whistled low. Look at that speed, he said. He is not even trying to layer it. He is panic transferring. He is dumping the entire load. On the screen, I watched the balance in the joint account drop from $300,000 to zero in the span of a single click. Back in the mansion, Preston closed his laptop with a snap. It is done, he said, letting out a long exhale. The money is safe. No one can touch it now. He stood up and checked his watch. Okay, I have to go. I have a meeting in New York with the senior partners of the law firm. I need to deliver the retainer in person to ensure they take the case immediately. Ebony looked confused. "You are leaving now?" she asked. "But we just got the money. Can we not at least go buy some food first?" Preston kissed her on the forehead. It was a cold, hurried kiss. The kiss of a man who never planned to return. "I have to go now, Ebony," he said, grabbing his suitcase, which I noticed was packed suspiciously heavy for a 2-day trip. "The sooner I leave, the sooner we win. I will call you when I land. Keep the doors locked." He walked out the front door without looking back at my parents. He walked out of the house he had mortgaged. He walked away from the wife he had bankrupted. Ebony stood at the window watching him get into the Uber. She waved. She thought she was waving goodbye to her husband for a few days. She did not realize she was waving goodbye to her entire future. The money was already halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, and Preston was heading to O'Hare International Airport with a one-way ticket to a country that did not have an extradition treaty. The betrayal was absolute. And the worst part was that they were still celebrating their victory while standing in the ashes of their ruin. The envelope Vance placed on my table was thick. It contained the kind of high-resolution surveillance photographs that end marriages and destroy lives. I picked up the first photo. It was taken outside a 5-star hotel in downtown Chicago just 2 hours ago. In the frame was Preston. He was wearing a new suit, likely purchased with the money he had just stolen from my parents. But he was not alone. Wrapped around his arm was a woman. She was tall, blonde, and undeniably wealthy. She was wearing a cream-colored Chanel coat that cost more than Ebony's entire wardrobe. Vance leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Meet Chloe," he said. "She is 22 years old. Her father owns a chain of luxury car dealerships in the suburbs. Preston has been seeing her for 6 months. He told her he is a divorced venture capitalist who is currently being stalked by his crazy ex-wife." I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "So Ebony is the crazy ex-wife?" I asked. Vance nodded. "According to the audio bug we planted in his car, yes." He told Chloe that Ebony is mentally unstable and that he needs to flee the country to get away from her drama. He told her that his family is trying to steal his crypto fortune. I looked at the next photo. It showed Preston and Chloe loading luggage into a black SUV. The luggage tags were clearly visible. They were not heading to a law firm in New York to pay a retainer. They were heading to O'Hare International Airport. And the destination tag on their bags read, GCM, Grand Cayman. He is cashing out, I realized, staring at the image. He did not just steal that $300,000 to pay debts or hire lawyers. He stole it to fund his new life. He is running away with his mistress on my parents' dime. He never planned to save the house. He planned to leave them in the ashes. I thought about Ebony sitting in that cold, dark house right now, waiting for her husband to call. She truly believed he was her savior. She had defended him against me. She had mocked me for being single and bitter. She had signed away her parents' home because she trusted his business genius. And now, while she was freezing in the dark, eating canned food, her golden boy was sipping champagne in the first-class lounge with a woman who looked exactly like the person Ebony desperately wanted to be. It was cruel. It was pathetic. And it was exactly what she deserved for choosing a con artist over her own sister. Vance tapped the table. "The flight leaves in 3 hours, Kendra. If he gets on that plane, the money is gone forever. We cannot touch him in the Caymans without a federal indictment, and that takes time." I shook my head. "We do not need to stop him at the gate, Vance. Let him go. If we stop him now, he might lawyer up. But if he gets on that plane, he leaves Ebony behind to face the consequences alone. That is a far greater punishment." "But I do want Ebony to know," I said, picking up the photo of Preston kissing Chloe's hand. "I want her to see this. I want her to see exactly what her loyalty has bought her. I want to break her heart before I break her bank account." "Send the photos to Ebony," I commanded. "Send them anonymously. And caption it simply, 'Have a nice flight.'" The silence in the colonial mansion had shifted over the last 30 days. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of waiting. For 4 weeks, my parents and Ebony had lived in a state of suspended animation. They checked their phones every hour. They jumped every time a car drove past the gate. They were waiting for their savior to return from the desert with a suitcase full of gold. Preston had not come back from New York. Instead, he had sent a text message 3 days after he left. He claimed that the legal team advised him to fly immediately to Dubai to meet with sovereign wealth investors. He said the opportunity was too big to miss. He said he was going to turn that $300,000 into $3 million overnight. Ebony clung to that text message like a lifeline. She recited it to herself when the house got cold at night. She told my parents that Preston was sacrificing everything for them. She said the poor signal in Dubai was the reason he was not answering her calls. She was building a castle out of sand while the tide was coming in. Then came the morning of the 31st day. A courier van pulled up to the gate. It was not a limousine. It was a process server from Omnicorp Financial. He did not ask for an autograph. He taped a bright orange envelope to the front door and took a photo of it as proof of delivery. Harold walked out to retrieve it. His step was slow. He was an old man now. The stress had aged him 10 years in a month. He tore open the envelope standing on the porch. He pulled out the document. The header was printed in bold red ink. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Harold squinted at the paper. He did not understand. He thought they had months. He thought they had time. He read the paragraph again, and then he screamed. It was a raw animal sound of confusion and terror. Tina ran out to him. "What is it, Harold?" she cried. "Is it Preston? Is he hurt?" "It is the house." Harold gasped, clutching his chest. "They are taking the house." Ebony stormed out onto the porch, snatching the paper from his hand. "You are reading it wrong, Daddy," she snapped. "Preston said we have a year. It is just a mistake." But as she read the fine print, her face turned the color of ash. Preston had not signed a standard mortgage. He had signed a high-risk, short-term bridge loan. The terms were predatory and explicit. The entire principal amount, plus 24% interest, was due in full after 30 days. It was a balloon payment. And because the 30 days were up and the account was empty, the lender had triggered the acceleration clause. They did not owe a monthly installment. They owed $370,000. Immediately. Ebony pulled out her phone. Her fingers were trembling so hard she dropped it once before picking it up. She dialed Preston's number, the number she had been texting for weeks. She put it on speaker so her parents could hear the reassurance. They needed to hear his voice. They needed him to explain that this was just a banking error. The line clicked. But it was not Preston. It was a robotic operator voice. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service or has been disconnected. Please check the number and try again." Ebony tried again, and again, and again. The mechanical voice was the only answer. The wind blew across the porch, rattling the orange paper in her hand. The realization hit them all at once. There was no deal in Dubai. There were no investors. There was only a lie that had bought Preston a 1-month head start. He had not just stolen their money. He had tricked them into signing their own eviction notice. They were standing on the porch of a $2 million home that now belonged to a shark, and they did not even have enough money for a moving truck. The air in courtroom 4B was stale and smelled of floor wax and desperation. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table looking like professional mourners. They had dressed the part perfectly. Harold was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big to make him look frail and shrunken. My mother Tina was wearing a modest gray cardigan and clutching a handkerchief that she used to dab at dry eyes every time the judge looked in her direction. Beside them sat Barry Henderson, their strip mall lawyer, who was sweating so profusely that a dark stain was already forming on the back of his cheap polyester jacket. They looked confident. They looked like people who believed their own lie. Every time I glanced over, Harold would offer me a small, smug smile. It was the smile of a man who thought he had finally cornered the wild animal. He thought that because I was sitting alone at the defense table, I was vulnerable. He thought that my silence over the last month was an admission of guilt. He had no idea that a predator is quietest right before it strikes. The judge was a stern woman named Justice Holloway. She had a reputation for hating time wasters and emotional theatrics. She peered over her glasses at Barry, who was fumbling through a stack of disorganized papers trying to find his opening statement. "Mr. Henderson," the judge said, her voice cutting through the room. "We are ready when you are." Barry stood up, knocking over a cup of water in the process. He stammered through an opening speech about filial duty and the moral obligation of children to care for the parents who gave them life. He painted a picture of two destitute elderly saints who had been cruelly discarded by their wealthy, heartless daughter. He used words like abandonment and cruelty. My mother let out a soft, practiced sob at the perfect moment. It was a good performance. If this were a daytime soap opera, they might have won an award. But this was not television. This was a court of law. And in this room, facts are the only currency that matters. When it was my turn, I did not jump up. I did not rush. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I smoothed down the front of my white Alexander McQueen suit. It was tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut glass. I picked up my iPad. That was all I brought. No boxes, no papers. Just one device loaded with the end of their world. I walked to the center of the room. The click of my heels on the hardwood floor was rhythmic and authoritative. I felt the energy in the room shift. The whispers in the gallery stopped. My parents stopped smiling. They realized suddenly that the daughter they raised to be a weapon was now pointing herself at them. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady and clear. "The plaintiffs have told you a very moving story about family and duty. They have tugged at your heartstrings. But I am not here to tell you a story. I am here to show you the math." I turned to look at my parents. Harold shrank back in his chair. "I am representing myself today because no one knows the details of this fraud better than I do," I continued, facing the judge. "The plaintiffs claim that I have abandoned them and left them destitute. They claim that they have no assets and no means of support. They are asking this court to force me to pay for their lifestyle under the guise of filial responsibility." I tapped the screen of my iPad, connecting it wirelessly to the large monitors on the wall. But what they failed to mention in their complaint is that their financial ruin is not a result of my abandonment. It is a result of their own criminal negligence and a decade of systematic embezzlement. I paused, letting the word embezzlement hang in the air like smoke. Barry jumped up, objecting loudly, but he was too late. I had already taken control of the room. I was not just a defendant anymore. I was the prosecutor, and the trial had truly just begun. I tapped my finger against the glass screen of my iPad. The monitors in the courtroom flickered to life, displaying a grainy scanned document. It was a police report, dated November 12, 2004. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low and controlled. "Before we discuss my current financial obligations to these people, we need to discuss a specific date. I was 14 years old. I was sitting in the back seat of my father's sedan when a drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned us. I swiped the screen to show a medical report. I suffered a compound fracture of the femur, a collapsed lung, and 3 broken ribs. I spent 6 weeks in traction. I had to learn how to walk again. It was the most painful experience of my life." My mother Tina let out a small gasp from the plaintiff's table. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. She remembered the accident, but she was praying I did not remember what came after. For years my parents told me that the insurance claim had been denied. I continued walking slowly toward them. They told me that the driver had no coverage. They told me we received nothing. They told me I was lucky just to be alive. I swiped the screen again. A high-resolution image of a check appeared on the monitors. It was issued by State Farm Insurance. The amount was clearly visible: $500,000. The courtroom went silent. My father, Harold, went rigid in his seat. "This check was issued as a settlement for my pain and suffering," I said, pointing at the screen. "It was legally my money. It was meant to pay for my college. It was meant to secure my future." I zoomed in on the back of the check. There was a signature on the endorsement line. It read Kendra Brooks. I looked at Barry Henderson, the opposing lawyer. Mr. Henderson, I want you to look closely at that signature. It is a very steady hand. Very cursive. Very elegant. Barry squinted at the screen, sweating. Now, look at the date of the endorsement, I said. January 15th. On that specific day, I was still in the hospital. I was heavily sedated and my right arm was in a cast. I could not feed myself, let alone sign a legal document. I turned to my father. You forged my signature, Dad. You waited until I was asleep in my hospital bed, and then you took the check that was meant for your crippled daughter, and you deposited it into your own account. Harold tried to stand up. We used it for the family, he shouted, his voice cracking. We needed a bigger house. We bought the mansion for you, Kendra, to give you a better life. I laughed. It was a sharp, cutting sound. No, Harold. You bought the mansion for yourself. You used my broken bones as a down payment on a status symbol. You stole $500,000 from a child. That is not just bad parenting, that is grand larceny. And since the fraud was concealed, the statute of limitations has not even begun to run. Barry Henderson slumped back in his chair. He looked at his clients with horror. He realized in that moment that he was not representing victims. He was representing felons, and he realized that I was not there to negotiate a settlement. I was there to construct a prison cell. Justice Holloway took off her glasses and placed them gently on the bench. The sound of the plastic frames hitting the wood was the only noise in the courtroom. She did not look at the papers anymore. She looked directly at my parents. Her expression was not one of judgment, it was one of absolute disgust. The silence stretched on for an agonizing minute. Barry Henderson was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was already soaked through. He started to stand up, likely to stammer out an apology or a motion to withdraw, but Justice Holloway raised a single finger to stop him. "Sit down, Mr. Henderson," she commanded. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the entire judicial system. "You have brought a circus into my courtroom, but I am afraid the show is over." She turned her gaze to Harold and Tina. "In all my years on the bench, I have seen many frivolous lawsuits. I have seen families tear each other apart over inheritances and petty grievances, but I have never seen a case quite like this. You came here claiming to be victims of abandonment. You asked this court to use its power to force your daughter to subsidize your lifestyle. You invoked the sanctity of family duty." She leaned forward. "But the evidence presented by the defense today paints a very different picture. You did not come here with clean hands. You came here with hands stained by fraud, theft, and deceit. You forged a child's signature to steal her insurance settlement. You allowed your son-in-law to use your accounts to launder illicit funds. You have lied to this court, and you have lied to your own daughter for decades." Harold tried to speak. "Your Honor, please," he croaked. "We did not know." Justice Holloway cut him off. "Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Mr. Brooks, especially when the evidence of intent is this overwhelming." She picked up her gavel. "Regarding the matter of Brooks versus Brooks, I find the plaintiff's claims to be entirely without merit. The motion for spousal maintenance and support is denied. The motion for emergency asset freezing is denied. I am dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice, which means you cannot refile it. You are liable for all of the defendant's legal fees and court costs." My mother let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. She thought it was over. She thought they had just lost the money, but Justice Holloway was not finished. However, she continued, her voice hardening to steel. "As a judge, I am a mandatory reporter of criminal activity. The evidence presented by Ms. Brooks regarding the forged insurance check constitutes a felony. The evidence regarding the international wire transfers indicates a violation of federal money laundering statutes." Harold went pale. His eyes bulged. "Therefore," Justice Holloway said, "I am ordering the bailiff to secure the evidence presented today. I am immediately referring this entire file to the Cook County State's Attorney and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for a criminal inquiry. You came here looking for a judgment, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. You have found one." She slammed the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. "Court is adjourned." The judge stood up and swept out of the room. I did not look at the judge. I looked at my parents. They were frozen in their chairs. They were no longer plaintiffs. They were suspects. I stood up and packed my iPad into my leather bag. I did not say a word to them. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on the people who had raised me and walked toward the heavy wooden doors. As I pushed them open, I heard Barry Henderson frantically whispering to them, telling them not to say another word without a criminal defense attorney present. I walked out into the hallway. The air tasted cleaner. The weight was gone. I had walked in as a daughter on trial, and I walked out as a free woman, leaving the wreckage of my past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. The final eviction notice did not come by mail. It came in the form of 4 Cook County Sheriff deputies standing on the front porch at 8 in the morning. The air was biting cold and the sky was a flat, gray sheet of steel. It was the kind of morning that felt like a judgment. My father Harold opened the door. He was wearing the same wrinkled suit he had worn to court. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. When he saw the uniforms, he did not try to argue. He did not puff out his chest or threaten to call his lawyer. He simply slumped against the doorframe as if the bones had been removed from his body. The lead deputy stepped forward. He was not unkind, but he was firm. He held a clipboard with the court order attached. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "the foreclosure judgment has been executed. The property is now under the possession of Omnicorp Financial. You have 15 minutes to gather your personal essentials and vacate the premises." 15 minutes. 30 years of living in a mansion. 30 years of collecting art and furniture and memories. All of it reduced to a 15-minute warning. Behind Harold, my mother Tina began to wail. It was a high, thin sound of pure panic. She ran around the foyer, grabbing random objects, a silver vase, a framed photo of herself, a sofa cushion. She did not know what to save, so she tried to save everything and succeeded in saving nothing. The deputies moved through the house with efficient precision. They were not there to help move furniture. They were there to clear the building. They walked through the rooms, checking closets and bathrooms, ensuring that no one was hiding. They carried rolls of yellow tape and heavy padlocks. Ebony was the last one out. She was standing in the middle of the driveway wearing a fur coat over her pajamas. She was clutching her iPhone like it was a religious artifact. Her face was streaked with mascara and her eyes were wild. She was not looking at the house. She was staring at the screen. "Pick up," she screamed at the phone. Her voice echoed off the stone walls of the neighbors' houses. "Pick up the phone, Preston. Where are you?" She dialed the number again. Her fingers hit the glass screen with desperate force. She put it on speakerphone and held it up to her ear. We listened. The deputies stopped taping the door for a second to watch. My parents stopped crying to listen. The line clicked. There was a moment of silence where hope flared up in Ebony's eyes. She thought he was there. She thought the hero had returned. But then came the voice. It was not the smooth, confident voice of Preston Miller. It was the flat, computerized voice of a telecom network. "The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." Ebony threw the phone. It skidded across the frozen pavement and cracked against the tire of the police cruiser. "He is gone, Ebony," my mother whispered. She walked over and put a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "He is not coming back." Ebony collapsed onto the driveway. She did not cry like a child. She howled like a wounded animal. She realized in that moment that she was not a crypto-millionaire's wife. She was the wife of a fugitive. She was homeless. And she was alone. The lead deputy finished placing a large orange sticker across the seam of the front door. He snapped a heavy padlock onto the handle. The sound of the lock clicking shut was loud and final. It was the sound of a book closing. "Okay, folks," the deputy said, gesturing to the street. "You have to move along. You cannot stay on the property." My family stood up. They gathered their few bags. They looked at the mansion one last time. It was dark and cold and sealed shut. They turned around and began to walk down the long driveway toward the public sidewalk. They walked slowly. They had nowhere to go and the rest of their lives to get there. The foreclosure auction took place on a rainy Tuesday morning in a sterile, windowless conference room in the basement of the Cook County Courthouse. It was a bleak setting for the end of an era. The room was filled with real estate sharks and investors looking for a bargain. They were men in cheap suits who smelled like stale coffee and greed. They were holding printouts of distressed properties circling the ones they wanted, like vultures circling a carcass. I was not there physically, not there. I could not risk being recognized. Instead, I sat in my high-rise office watching a live video feed on my secure laptop. I sipped my sparkling water and watched the monitor with the cold detachment of a surgeon observing a procedure. The auctioneer stood at the podium. He did not care about the history of the homes he was selling. To him, they were just lot numbers and case files. He cleared his throat and announced the next item. Lot 42, he droned into the microphone. A luxury colonial estate located on Lakeshore Drive. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, 3-car garage. Previously owned by the Brooks family. Opening bid starts at $1.2 million. My heart did not race. My pulse remained steady. I watched as the sharks began to feed. A man in a blue windbreaker raised his paddle. 1.2 million. Another man in the front row countered. 1.25. They were lowballing. They knew the property was worth double that. They were trying to steal it for pennies on the dollar because they knew the previous owners were desperate and the bank just wanted to recoup its losses. The bidding crawled up slowly. 1.3. 1.4. It was pathetic. My father had always bragged that his house was priceless. Now strangers were haggling over it like it was a used car. Then came the moment I had orchestrated. A man standing in the back of the room stepped forward. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than the cars of everyone else in the room combined. He was my personal attorney representing a newly formed shell company. He held his paddle up high. $2.5 million, he said. His voice was calm, loud, and absolute. The room went silent. The auctioneer stopped his rhythmic chant. The other investors turned around to look at the stranger. 2.5 million was not a bargain price. It was a dominance price. It was a bid designed to clear the board. The auctioneer recovered his composure. I have a bid of $2.5 million from bidder number 7. Do I hear 2.6? Silence. The sharks looked at their spreadsheets and shook their heads. There was no profit margin left for them. They put their paddles down. Going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. He slammed his gavel down. Sold to bidder number 7 for $2.5 million. My attorney walked to the front of the room to sign the paperwork. On the screen, I watched him fill out the deed transfer. When he reached the line for the owner's name, he did not write Kendra Brooks. He wrote the name of the corporation I had registered specifically for this purpose. Nemesis Holdings, LLC. It was a petty touch, perhaps, but I have always appreciated Greek mythology. Nemesis was the goddess who enacted retribution against those who succumbed to hubris and arrogance. It fit perfectly. I closed the laptop. The transaction was complete. The house that my parents had used to intimidate me, the house that Preston had gambled away, the house that symbolized all their lies now belonged to me. But I had no intention of living there. I did not buy it to build a home. I bought it because owning the battlefield is the only way to ensure the war is truly over. My parents were currently sitting in a motel room wondering who had bought their legacy. They had no idea that their landlord was the daughter they had tried to destroy. The wind off Lake Michigan was razor sharp, cutting through the thin coats of the 3 people huddled on the sidewalk. My parents and Ebony looked like refugees from a high-fashion magazine shoot gone wrong. They were surrounded by a pathetic fortress of Louis Vuitton suitcases and garbage bags filled with hasty decisions. They were shivering not just from the cold, but from the anticipation. They were waiting for the representative from Nemesis Holdings. My father, Harold, was pacing back and forth rehearsing his speech. He had convinced himself that the new owner was just a businessman, a faceless investor. Harold believed he could charm this stranger. He planned to offer to manage the property in exchange for letting them stay in the guest house. He was delusional. He thought he still had bargaining power. Ebony was sitting on a suitcase reapplying her lipstick, using her phone as a mirror. She wanted to look presentable. She whispered to my mother that maybe the new owner was a single billionaire. Maybe he would see her distress and fall in love. Even at rock bottom, she was still trying to climb a ladder that no longer existed. Then they heard the engine. It was a low, powerful purr that vibrated in their chests. They looked up. Turning the corner onto the street was a phantom black Bentley flying spur. It moved with the silent grace of a predator. The sunlight gleamed off its polished chrome grille. Harold straightened his tie. "Here he comes," he whispered. "Stand up, Tina. Look respectable. This is our chance." The car slowed down and pulled up directly to the curb where they were standing. The window tint was pitch black. They could not see inside. They could only see their own desperate reflections in the glass. The driver's door opened first. A large man in a uniform stepped out. He walked around to the rear passenger door. Harold stepped forward, extending his hand ready to greet his savior. The driver opened the rear door. It was not a billionaire businessman who stepped out. First came the shoe, a red-soled stiletto heel sharp enough to draw blood, then the leg draped in black silk trousers, then the rest of me. I stepped out of the Bentley and stood to my full height. I was wearing a trench coat that cost more than the settlements they had tried to sue me for. I adjusted my sunglasses and looked down at them. The silence on the sidewalk was absolute. Harold's hand was still extended in the air, frozen in a greeting that would never be completed. Ebony's lipstick dropped from her hand and rolled into the gutter. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. "Kendra." Harold stammered, his voice shaking. "What? What are you doing here? You need to leave. The new owner is arriving any minute. We are in the middle of a business negotiation." I did not smile. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of heavy iron keys. I dangled them in the air. The metal clinked softly in the wind. "I am not interrupting your negotiation, Harold," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I am the negotiation." Ebony stood up, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" she whispered. I walked past them toward the gate. I touched the cold metal of the lock. "Nemesis Holdings is not a hedge fund," I said, turning back to face them. "It is a holding company. My holding company. I bought the house this morning. I bought the debt. I bought the deed. I own every brick, every window, and every blade of grass you are standing next to." My mother let out a gasp and grabbed Harold's arm to steady herself. "You bought it!" she cried. "Oh, thank God! Kendra, you saved us. I knew you would not let us be homeless. Can we go inside now? It is freezing out here." She took a step toward the gate, expecting me to open it, expecting the prodigal daughter to return to her role as the doormat. I held up my hand. "Stop," I said. My mother froze. "You seem to be confused," I said, putting the keys back in my pocket. "I did not buy this house to save you. I bought it so I could be the one to ensure you never set foot inside it again. You are trespassing on private property, and I suggest you move your bags off my sidewalk before I have my driver call the police to remove the debris." My father's face underwent a transformation that was almost frightening to watch. In the span of a single second, the terror and humility evaporated from his features. The slump in his shoulders vanished. He stood up straight and puffed out his chest. The arrogance returned instantly, as if it had never left. He looked at me not with gratitude, but with a sickening sense of vindication. He thought he had won. He thought that my purchase was an admission of defeat, a signal that I had finally remembered my place as the family provider. Harold turned to my mother and clapped his hands together. "See, Tina," he boomed, his voice regaining its usual pompous volume. "I told you to have faith. I told you she was just teaching us a lesson. Kendra is a good girl deep down. She knows she cannot leave her parents on the street. She bought the house to secure it for us. She paid off the debt so we can have a fresh start." My mother wiped her tears and let out a breathless laugh. "Oh, Kendra," she gushed, stepping toward me with her arms open. "Thank you. I was so scared." I promise we will be more careful with money from now on. Now give your father the keys so we can go inside and turn up the thermostat. I am freezing to death out here." Ebony picked up her suitcase. She looked at me with a smirk. "You really had us going there for a minute," she said. "Nice power move, sis. But seriously, open the gate. I need to charge my phone." I did not move. I did not hand over the keys. I stood there like a statue carved out of ice. I watched them celebrate a victory that did not exist. It was fascinating to see how quickly they rewrote reality to fit their own narrative. They truly believed that after everything they had done after the fraud, the theft and the lawsuits, that I would still be their safety net. I took a step back, avoiding my mother's hug. She stumbled slightly. "You seem to be misunderstanding the situation," I said, my voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Harold, you said you knew I was a good girl. You said you knew I would not leave you on the street. You are wrong on both counts." Harold's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "You bought the house. It is in your name." "Yes," I said, "I bought the house. But I did not buy it for you. I bought it because the land value is excellent, and I have always hated this structure. It is outdated, it is gaudy, and it smells like failure." I pointed to the mansion looming behind the iron gates. "I filed for a demolition permit this morning." I continued, speaking slowly so they would not miss a word. "My contractors are scheduled to arrive on Monday. They are going to bulldoze this entire building. They are going to crush every wall and smash every window. And when the lot is flat and empty, I am going to build a heated, Olympic-sized swimming pool." My mother gasped, clutching her throat. "You are going to tear down your childhood home," she shrieked. "You cannot do that. That is our legacy." "Your legacy is a lie," I replied, "and I am burying it. I am not letting you live here. I am not letting you rent here. I am erasing this place from the map." Ebony dropped her suitcase. Her mouth fell open. "You are joking," she whispered. "You are just trying to scare us." I looked at my watch. It was a platinum Rolex that I bought for myself. "I do not joke about real estate, Ebony," I said. "This is now a construction site, and for liability reasons I cannot have civilians loitering on the premises. You have exactly 30 minutes to remove your personal belongings from my curb. If you are still here when my security detail arrives, I will have you arrested for trespassing." Harold looked at the keys in my hand. He looked at the cold, unyielding expression on my face. The realization finally hit him. The bank was closed. The bridge was burned. And his daughter was not the savior. She was the executioner. "But where will we go?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "We have nowhere." I turned around and walked back toward the Bentley. The driver opened the door for me. I paused one last time and looked back at them huddled in the cold. "I hear the Motel 6 by the highway has vacancies," I said. "It is cheap, and they usually leave the lights on." "Good luck, Harold." I slid into the warm leather seat and the door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud. As the car pulled away, I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what I would see. 3 strangers standing on a sidewalk, realizing that the free ride was over forever. I rolled down the tinted rear window of the Bentley one last time. The electric motor hummed softly as the glass lowered, revealing my family huddled together on the sidewalk. They looked up with a flicker of hope. They thought perhaps I had changed my mind. They thought I was going to offer them a ride or a check or a warm meal. They did not understand that mercy was a language I no longer spoke. I held up my large tablet so the screen faced them. The brightness was turned up to the maximum level, cutting through the gloom of the gray morning. "Before I leave," I said, my voice carrying over the wind, "I thought you might want to see the weather forecast for the Cayman Islands. Spoiler alert. It is storming." I pressed play on the live news feed. The volume was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The familiar breaking news graphic of a local Chicago station flashed across the screen, followed by a reporter standing outside the sliding glass doors of O'Hare International Airport. The reporter looked serious. We are live at Terminal 5, where federal agents have just apprehended a fugitive attempting to board a flight to Grand Cayman. The suspect has been identified as Preston Miller, a local cryptocurrency entrepreneur accused of running a massive Ponzi scheme. Ebony gasped. She took a step toward the car, clutching the gate for support. "No," she whispered. "That is not real." On the screen, the camera zoomed in. The footage was shaky and chaotic. A group of agents wearing navy blue windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back were dragging a man out of the departure line. It was Preston. But he did not look like the confident genius they knew. His expensive suit jacket was torn. His hair was a mess. He had lost a shoe in the scuffle. He was thrashing against the agents like a trapped rat. His hands were cuffed behind his back. As they shoved him toward a waiting black SUV, he turned his head toward the news cameras. He looked desperate. He looked deranged. "It was not me!" Preston screamed at the camera, his voice cracking. "I was just the middleman. It was my wife, Ebony Brooks. She set it up. She has the passwords. Ask her father Harold. He signed the papers. They made me do it." My father Harold staggered back as if he had been punched in the gut. He stared at the screen in horror. The man he had mortgaged his home for was not only a criminal, but he was currently naming Harold as the mastermind on live television. Preston continued to scream as the agents forced his head down and shoved him into the vehicle. "They are the ones you want," Preston howled. "The Brooks family. They stole the money. I am innocent." The car door slammed shut, cutting off his lies. The feed cut back to the reporter, who was now talking about the scale of the fraud, but my family was no longer listening. Ebony stood on the curb with her mouth open. Her entire world had just disintegrated. Her husband had not only abandoned her, he had tried to frame her. The love of her life was willing to send her to prison to save his own skin. I lowered the tablet. The silence on the street was heavy. "I sent the file to the FBI an hour ago," I said calmly. "I gave them his flight number. I gave them the offshore account numbers. And I gave them the audio recordings of him bragging about leaving you behind." Ebony looked at me. Her eyes were empty. "He was never going to send for you, Ebony," I said. "You were just the getaway car. And now you are just the collateral damage." I pressed the button on the door. The window rolled up slowly, sealing me back inside my warm, quiet sanctuary. I tapped on the partition and told the driver to go. As the Bentley pulled away, I watched them in the rearview mirror one last time. They were standing amidst their luggage, 3 people who had bet everything on a lie and lost. The news cycle would move on by tomorrow, but for them, the nightmare was just beginning. The Bentley began to roll forward, its tires crunching softly against the asphalt of the driveway. But before it could gather speed, a frantic figure threw herself against the side of the car. It was Ebony. She had abandoned her luggage and her dignity. She grabbed the door handle with both hands, her fingernails scratching against the polished black metal. She was sobbing so hard that her body shook. She banged her fist against the tinted glass, screaming my name. "Stop!" she wailed. "Kendra, please stop. Do not leave me here. Leave me. I am scared." I sighed and tapped the partition. The driver hit the brakes. The car came to a halt. I did not unlock the door. I simply lowered the window a few inches. Just enough to hear her beg. Just enough for her to see that I was not moved by her tears. Ebony pressed her face to the gap. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivers. Her hair, which was usually styled to perfection, was matted against her forehead. She looked like a child who had lost her mother in a crowded store. "Kendra, you cannot do this," she choked out. "I am your sister. I am your baby sister. We played dolls together. We grew up in this house together. You cannot leave me on the curb like a stray dog. I have no money. I have no credit cards. Preston took everything. I do not even have enough for a taxi." She reached her hand through the crack, trying to touch me, trying to make a connection. "I am not built for this," she pleaded. "I cannot be homeless. I am an influencer. I have a reputation. What will people say? Please, Kendra, just give me $5,000. Just enough to get a hotel and some clothes. I will pay you back. I promise. I looked at her hand. It was manicured, soft, uncalloused. It was the hand of a woman who had never worked a day in her life, a woman who believed that the world owed her a living simply because she existed. I leaned forward so my face was close to the glass. You are not an influencer, Ebony, I said, my voice low and steady. You are a 26-year-old woman with a liberal arts degree you never used and a wardrobe bought with stolen money. You are not a victim. You are a parasite. Ebony flinched as if I had slapped her. You say you are not built for this, I continued. That is the problem. You have spent your entire life being carried. You let Mom and Dad carry you. Then you let Preston carry you. And now that they all fell down, you want me to pick you up. I shook my head. Not this time. Ebony stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. But what am I supposed to do? She whispered. I have no skills. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. No skills, I repeated. That is not true. You have 2 arms. You have 2 legs. You are perfectly healthy. You can stand for 8 hours a day. I pointed a gloved finger toward the commercial district down the hill. On my way here, I passed the strip mall on 4th Street, I said. I saw a sign in the window of Starbucks. They are hiring baristas. Starting pay is $15 an hour plus tips. Ebony looked at me with horror. Starbucks, she spat. You want me to serve coffee, like a servant. I shrugged. It is honest work, Ebony, something you know nothing about. They offer health insurance and a free apron. It is time you learned how to make a latte instead of just drinking them on my dime. But I am Ebony Brooks, she insisted, her voice rising in hysteria. I cannot work at a coffee shop. It is humiliating. I pressed the button to roll up the window. Hunger has a funny way of curing humiliation, I said as the glass began to rise. Wait, Ebony screamed, trying to hold the window down. Kendra, wait. Goodbye, Ebony, I said calmly. The window sealed shut, cutting off her screams. The interior of the car returned to its peaceful silence. I tapped the partition again. The driver nodded and pressed the accelerator. As the car pulled away, I did not look back at the girl standing on the curb. I knew she would cry for another hour. Then she would get cold. Then she would get hungry. And eventually she would walk down that hill and ask for an application. It was the best gift I could have given her. The gift of reality. The black Bentley disappeared around the corner, leaving a trail of exhaust that quickly vanished in the cold wind. My parents, Harold and Tina, sat on their suitcases like castaways on a concrete island. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a party that had ended abruptly, leaving only the mess behind. Harold looked up at the towering colonial mansion, the house he had bragged about for 30 years, the house he had mortgaged to fund a scam. It looked different now. It looked like a fortress that had finally locked him out. He looked at Tina. She was shivering, her face buried in her hands. For the first time in his life, Harold saw the truth clearly. It was a painful, blinding realization. They had spent decades pampering Ebony, who was now crying over a lost lifestyle. They had worshipped Preston, who was now in handcuffs, blaming them for his crimes. And they had demonized Kendra, Kendra who paid the bills, Kendra who tried to warn them, Kendra who was the only person in the family who actually knew how to survive. They had chased the glitter of fool's gold and thrown away the diamond. Now, as the first snowflakes began to fall, Harold reached out and touched Tina's hand. We bet on the wrong horse, he whispered, his voice breaking. We bet on the wrong horse and now we have to walk home. But looking at the empty street, he realized with a sinking heart that they no longer had a home to walk to. The sun rose over Lake Michigan, but this time it did not cast long shadows on peeling wallpaper and dusty chandeliers. It shone through floor-to-ceiling glass walls, illuminating the sharp, clean lines of my new sanctuary. I stood on the limestone terrace of the home I had built from the ground up. Where the rotting colonial mansion once stood, there was now a sleek modern fortress of steel and light. Below me, the heated Olympic-sized swimming pool shimmered in the morning light exactly as I had promised it would. I took a slow sip of my espresso and checked the notification on my phone. It was an email from the board of directors at Sterling and Cooper. The subject line read, "Unanimous vote." They had not just reinstated me, they had promoted me to senior managing partner. The firm that had suspended me was now under my command. I smiled. It was the only time I had smiled in this zip code in 30 years. I looked down at the driveway where my parents had once stood shivering with their suitcases. There were no ghosts here anymore. There was only the clean, quiet satisfaction of a life built on truth. I had paved over the past, and the foundation was finally strong enough to hold me. Justice is a slow wheel, but when it finally crushed Preston Miller, it ground him into dust. The federal judge did not care about his charisma or his fake business plans. He sentenced Preston to 15 years in a maximum security prison for wire fraud and money laundering. The crypto genius who once drank champagne in first class was now drinking tap water in a concrete cell wearing a jumpsuit that matched the color of the foreclosure notice he had ignored. Miles away in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the subsidized housing block, my parents were serving a sentence of their own. The air in their unit smelled of stale cooking oil and resentment. Harold and Tina spent their days sitting in armchairs they had salvaged from a dumpster, screaming at each other over the noise of the television. Harold blamed Tina for signing the papers. Tina blamed Harold for trusting the wrong man. They were trapped together in a purgatory of their own making, fueled by cheap coffee and bitter regret. And then there was Ebony. The girl who thought manual labor was beneath her was now kneeling at the feet of strangers. She had become a mobile manicurist, traveling from house to house, carrying a heavy plastic tote bag filled with chemicals. Her hands, which used to hold designer purses, were now callous and stained with polish. She spent her days scrubbing the feet of women who used to be her followers, forcing a smile for a $5 tip. She had wanted to be famous. Now she was just anonymous. The city lights below are beautiful tonight. Standing here on my private terrace with the cool night air against my skin and a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in my hand, I finally feel something I have not felt in decades. Peace. For so long, I let an old proverb rule my life. People love to say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as a weapon to keep you in line. They use it to guilt you into tolerating abuse and disrespect. They tell you that you owe your family everything simply because you share the same DNA. But as I look out at the empire I have built and think about the toxic weight I finally cut loose, I realize the truth. That saying is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the hard work of setting boundaries. Blood may be thicker than water, but blood can also be poisoned. Blood can be infected with jealousy and greed. And when the blood is toxic, sometimes the only way to survive is to choose the water. Clean, fresh water that washes the pain away. I chose myself. I chose dignity over duty, and that is not selfishness. That is survival. I did not lose a family. I gained a future. Now I want to ask you a question. Are you holding on to toxic relationships just because you are afraid to let go? Do you believe that family is defined by love and actions rather than just biology? If you agree that respect is something that must be earned rather than blindly given, I want you to hit that like button right now. Let the algorithm know that we refuse to be victims. And if you want to hear more stories about justice, karma, and taking back your power, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications. You do not want to miss the next chapter of the truth. My name is Kendra Brooks, and here is to living life on your own terms. Cheers.